It's all good. Here, I'll do this.
I'll take it all out in post.
Yeah, fix it in post for sure. My name's Charlie. You guys know. Why would I send this to anybody we didn't know? I have the unique privilege and probably to Josh's sort of disadvantage to be in his campaign. I play Cal. And so it's tough for him to be able to perhaps tell all, given that there's probably some things he wants to keep under wraps. And so it's kind of a win-win for me where I get to kind of hear about some inner workings that I wasn't previously aware of. Whereas my campaign, which happens in a continent called Josadius, is completely removed. Bobo has no stake. Josh is really just, someone I bounce ideas off of, and he's been, entirely inspirational. He and the gang, and I, who spent a lot of time together these last few years, virtually and not so, playing Dungeons and Dragons. But our last session, I'll kind of catch everybody up here. Found our heroes in Fort Falgalesdu, which is the underground mountain lair of one of our player characters' fathers, evil tyrant father, with a dark but familiar ulterior motive for reuniting his family. So our players consist of, and I'll just use first names because it's just too much to keep track of otherwise. Because I'm playing with 5 players. I really bit off a lot. Starting out as a DM, Bobo's seasoned. He picked out 3, which is a number I'm really in love with. Alas, these players are really, really incredible, and I'm so grateful to have them all. We have Sly, our cleric. We have Crust, our barbarian, whose father we're soon going to confront. We have Keith, our bard. We have Kartikeya, our warforged not our artificer, excuse me, our wizard. And lastly, we have Gleason, our dwarven artificer. Now, our party has been separated these last several sessions, in fact, in part because of necessity and in part because it kind of made sense. We had all met in person, all me and my players, a couple of months ago, at sort of a climactic moment in the campaign when they had come upon one of the, I think probably what was going to be the final setting of the second arc of my 3-arc campaign. Unfortunately, they went off to prioritize different sorts of things. One of them was sort of investigating the inner life of the army that Crust's father commanded, called the Iron Tribe, whereas the rest of the party went, for the most part, to go and investigate the inside of the fort. They delved deep into the mountain fortress and started taking some big risks. All my players are level 12, so they have some big resources. They have a lot of them, and they're willing to get out there and sort of take some risks. Unfortunately, they were under the influence of what's called a Windwalk spell. Now, Windwalk is a tremendous spell in that it allows substantial movement. I'm talking 300 feet in a round. If you dash, if you take your whole turn to move, that's 600 feet in a single round of movement. However, that comes with many. In addition to that, you also have resistance to all damage. But unfortunately, that comes with a lot of disadvantages. Now, that's a very high level spell, right? That's something like 7th level. That was a boon that was granted to them by an unlikely ally, a half giant, half dragon called Zechuk the Mist Titan. And we'll get into that later. But the problem with the Windwalk spell is that it takes an entire minute to move in and out of this sort of cloudy, misty form that can allow you to zoom so quickly from place to place. In addition, you can't speak when you're in this form. You can't cast spells. You can't put up a fight. You can't do anything except for move and try not to get hit. So the giant, foreboding, steel wooden doors of the fort closed behind one half of our party while the rest of our party was stranded outside. And now the group that was inside of the fort consisted of Kartikeya, Sly, and the focus of this second arc, Crust, or Barbarian. They had the choice to sort of try and escape from the fort, reconvene, and wait for the army that they had marshaled from the capital city of the continent of Josadius called Meridian. But they decided that they were going to take some risks, do a little reconnaissance, and see what there was to see inside of this bizarre, eccentric underground fortress. They do some digging. They get pretty far, and their priority is to find the man himself. His name is Kalesh, the Iron-Fisted King, and he is king of the Iron Tribe and Crust's estranged father. Now, Crust and his father have a very complicated relationship in that Kalesh didn't have very many second thoughts when he swiftly chopped the head off of Crust's mother and threw the very young Crust into a river to float away and be discovered eventually by a found family. And so Crust had some intentions for his father, as you can imagine, as did the party, because they were very fairly invested in his story. He's one of our most lovable characters, very even keel and wise, and simple, but just a good, humble, down to earth sort of half orc. And they managed to explore the majority of the fort. Now, let me make this absolutely clear. I did not expect the party to get into the fort. I did not expect them to stay as long as they did. And I did not expect us to play for 7 hours. Okay? So we were about 2.5 hours deep by the time that they decided to travel into pretty unprepared territory. Regardless, they managed to find the throne room where Kalesh sits in a very Game of Thrones-esque throne made of weapons. In addition, they managed to locate one of Crust's found fathers, chained, kidnapped to the wall of the throne room and guarded by one of the king's elect. Now, these are orcs of the Iron Tribe, of Kalesh's people, but that have been given Attack on Titan-esque gifts to be able to transform into these monstrous giants, when they're made to draw their own blood, right? When they're made to wound themselves. And after they sort of tried to do some negotiation and managed to subdue the minion, whose name was Pain, they tried to pull Crust's found father out of there. His name was Brent. Brent's a kind human man, one of the 2 men that adopted Crust when he was very young. But they found that the chains holding Crust's found father to the walls of the throne room were enchanted, and that they were going to be made to either sprint away from the scene like chickens with their heads cut off, lose their turn. What was the other thing? Or nothing would happen, I think. Maybe it was that they would turn on their friends, or they would try and assist Kalesh's underling, this king, this half orc named Pain, or this full orc rather. But after a few shenanigans trying to dispel the magic of the chains, orcs heard sound of the commotion, flooded into the chamber, and incapacitated our cleric. Oh God, one of the big and most important ways that our wizard Kartikeya was made to be separated from the party was that he made an unfortunate roll that that demanded he flee as far from the chains as he could possibly go. And the way to do that was to cast the plane shift spell and teleport to a different plane of existence. Right? So magically compelled to escape, to leave, to go as far as he can, he separates himself seemingly irrevocably from the party in their time of need. And the session ended with our bard, our cowboy bard Keith, and our dwarven artificer Gleason with a plot to forge into the fort and rescue their party. Meanwhile, even though our cleric's eye was overwhelmed, her life was spared, in the hopes that maybe they would earn this Pain character's trust, and that the king would come and delay the ultimate judgment for Sly. Meanwhile, Crust was chained to the throne, his father's throne, and made to wait for the inevitable arrival of the BBEG of the second arc of the Josadius campaign. So that's kind of the recap, and now I'll kind of talk about how DMing this session was. Here, I'll find. Here we go. That's appropriate. So it was originally my intention to talk about the last session I just had, right, which is one that maybe Bobo is more familiar with. But I realized as I was attempting to do it that I still needed to debrief about this session that happened maybe a month ago. So my buddies and I, we hadn't played an in-person session in a year. Quarantine had separated us all over the country, one of us in Connecticut, one of us in Maryland, being me, a couple of us still in Michigan, and yet more of us in South Carolina. It was a mess, and we kind of missed playing in person dearly. And we all like each other. We're all they're a really fun group. And excuse me, around the time that we started playing, we were playing in person every week. And when quarantine started, but nobody had caught the message about how spending any time with people they didn't usually spend is totally dangerous. We were playing multiple sessions a week. Like, there was some churn. And so to go from that to just stale nothing, just completely online, was tough. It was tough. So this was a really exciting weekend for all of us. We got an Airbnb in this lake house and in this little rural lake town next to Charleston in South Carolina, with the intention of not only spending time together, but also playing a really long, intense session in person again. Now, at this point, I had kind of taken a page out of Josh's book, and I had started implementing cutscenes in my story as well. I wrote a cutscene for which I was very happy, that featured one of the pantheon gods of my world, and I haven't settled on a name for him yet, but the name that the party knows him by is Juan Carlos. And Juan Carlos, he had a love interest that he was sort of chasing after throughout the campaign. The party sort of got to watch, and her name was Helena. She was a hobgoblin, modeled after the hobgoblin Eldritch Knight fighter that I played in a campaign with Josh and his friends last year that ended recently. But the cutscene was really exciting because we hadn't played in a while at that point. Everybody had been pretty busy, and they still are. We're playing very sporadically, and we're having to play very split apart sessions because, one guy, he's got med school applications to do. Another guy, Zach, who plays our barbarian, our orcish barbarian Crust, he's enlisted in the Navy, and he's trying to pass all these manner of tests in order to be employed. He's also getting engaged. And the world, I mean, the bottom line is the world is opening up again and people are busy. And a 6-person party, including, of course, myself, is difficult to schedule. You know, Josh can tell you himself, it's a 4-person party that he's running, and it's hard enough as it is to schedule, right? It's hard enough to get everybody motivated, to fill out scheduling forms and things like that. So this was a big deal. And to only be about 2.5 hours into this session that everybody was looking forward to for so many months and be at the end of your prepared material was probably one of the most disheartening and terrifying experiences I've had as a DM. I was actually not only terribly exhausted after that session, but I was also totally bummed out because I thought it had been a huge disappointment. I thought that I let myself down. I thought I'd let everybody else down. I had to really think about my relationship to storytelling into this game. Because at the time, I mean, it was very important to me. Like, one of the critical differences between Josh's story and mine is that his is maybe his, God, I don't know how many, he's probably lost count, 11th or 12th game story in sort of an interactive storytelling format that he's ever told, whereas this is my very first. And I'm just like, I am feeling myself and watching myself go through all these firsts and go through all these ups and downs, these grand highs and these really just humbling lows. And I was talking to Josh and I was like, listen, you know, I'm made to feel so, I'm made to feel like I failed, like as a person, when I don't feel like a session went well or when a player has a complaint. And I'm paraphrasing what Josh said, but he said something like, if that much of this game hinges on, if that much is at stake for you, then that's a problem. Like, the failures in a story should be opportunities. You know what I'm saying? And I spent a lot of time thinking at the end of that session, because I mean, everything was made up. I didn't intend for the party to get into the fort. I didn't intend to have to describe it at the length that I did. I didn't intend them to find some sort of throne room, find Crust's father and one of Kalesh the Iron-Fisted King's minions guarding them. I didn't intend for the chains that Brent was bound by to be enchanted. and I definitely, out of the blue, came up with the magical effects that trying to free someone from those chains would cause. But looking back on it all, a bunch of stuff has happened since Kartikeya, who plane shifted into the Feywild, is currently interacting with Greg, his player's previous character, and they're sort of doing all sorts of kind of tying up of loose ends as far as that part of the story went. Gleason and Keith, our bard and our artificer, are discovering all manner of things about themselves, about each other, about the world, as they travel together. And I think especially two of our strongest players who have had their same characters for a very long time, Sly, our cleric, and Crust, barbarian, for about whom this arc is sort of centered, they are made to be the instruments of stakes. Like, their characters are the ones that sort of understand and communicate to the other characters that they might not walk out of here. They have no idea why it is that Crust's father wants to unite his family, why he's worked so hard to get Crust and his other son, Crust's half-brother Rex, into this inner sanctum and the final setting of Arc 2 of this campaign. And I'm just so grateful. I think that my tune has definitely changed. And the last session I ran, which was several sessions after the sort of the very transformational experience that the Charleston session was. It was wonderful, and not just because the players were very content, but because I felt so grateful that they made the choices they made, and that we have grown so much as a group, because most of them were first-time players, and I was a first-time DM at the beginning. We were all really bad at the beginning, man. I was a bad DM. They were players just trying to find their niche, their purpose. Trying to invest them in each other's stories and trying to find some common thread, some through line that united them all. It was a challenge, and I'm so happy that I did it. I think that they're having a lot of fun, and I think, looking back, importantly, the Charleston session for them was a lot of fun. Like they, like Josh has been telling me lately, be mean to your characters, and boy howdy did I separated them. I sent one of them to the Feywild without a plane shift spell to return. I trapped them with very little resources in the lair of the BBEG of the big second arc of this campaign. And I wish you could have seen them. They were hopping around that little Airbnb. They were like stepping outside for air and just like pulling their hair out and probably having a ton of fun. And so I'm realizing more and more with this group, like every session is such a learning experience that you can't take things too seriously. You got to be transparent. And a lot of the times the most fun stuff happens off the book, off the written records. And the stuff that you plan is great because you're in your comfort zone. But the magic happens when you're not telling the story, when your players are, So that's my 10 minutes. That's kind of our story so far.
You're not having the most fun when you're planning it. You're having the most fun when your players are existing in it. When thinking minds are interacting is the best distillation I've ever heard of why I love D&D, of why I value improv over planning, of why the actual in-game session is so much more than writing a fantasy novel could be.
Yeah, no, I used to write the session. Like I used to write the sessions, what was going to happen from
like
beginning to end. Like a script, exactly, like a script, man. And at your behest in a lot of ways, because I think you and I started talking about each other's campaigns at a point where we were maybe on polar opposites of the spectrum, or maybe you were pretty far left of center where I was way, way, way far right of center. Meaning I was scripting my campaigns, whereas you were coming off of Mura, where like you didn't even like plan your battles.
Right.
Like you throw a dragon in there, and that's the fun of it, right? Is it if things are going a little bit too smoothly, make your players sweat, give them a countdown timer. That's the best. It's the best thing to do for sure.
Well put, DM.
Yeah.
When last we left our heroes, the FBI are a relatively new adventuring party that just picked up in the main city of Bellamon, the largest city in all of the world of Practice Farm. And they are, amongst everything else they're doing, running missions for Prince Parlis. It's often been said that whenever two countries are not at war, it's because there's a reason. It's because there's someone busting their ass to stop that war from happening. And for my world, Parlis is that guy. He's employed the FBI, Foreboding International, as they've taken to calling themselves, to going to the westernmost country in the world, Tirigland, and traveling north to a small town of Dunving and rescuing it boldly in the public eye from undead, so that they can gain face and eventually bring the nations together in a sort of public act. Where the party finds themselves now is traveling north through said desert country, alongside a man who's taken to calling himself Alabaster. But the party knows from a cutscene from earlier, he is actually Ranger Drizzt Do'Urden, undercover. At the start of this session, he was exposed. He had given himself away in a moment of fury during the last fight, and they caught him out alongside that which he was transporting, a yet unknown magical artifact. So the session begins with the briefcase that contains it folding back open, and the party sees a gun, a revolver, a 6-shooter, out of character with seemingly all of the rest of the technology in the world. And on the names, or there are rather names over each of the chambers in the gun's cylinder, 6 of them, 2 unknown to the party, 1 scratched off. One of them, a woman's name, Maddock, with the last name, Patch, last name shared by one of the party members. Then, Anton Parlis, the very prince they've taken to serving. And lastly, Drizzt Do'Urden, the man transporting the gun, who they just found out. The party, which consists of Baragon, their de facto leader, a Leonin monk, Cal, Reverie, a doctor, and Claymore Patch, a sort of doctor, hold Drizzt accountable and ask him what the gun is for. They find out a few important pieces of information. First, that this is a magical artifact made by Arkansas. This is a name the party recognizes, too. Arkansas was in the one-shot that preceded the entire campaign, making weapons out of people's souls. Impossible, incredible, forbidden magical designs. And it seems like, for whatever reason, 18 years later, he's at it again, with a gun with the leader of the largest country in the world's name on it. So they find out that Drizzt stole this gun from Alabaster on some sort of mission from the government of Tirigland under Parlis himself. Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So when they ask him, why do we keep you alive after having this information? After you're trying to kill our boss? He says, well, because I'm being trailed by doppelgangers. And more than that, I know how to fight them. So, the party finds themselves in an interesting situation. Their decision? Lay a trap for the doppelgangers, with Drizzt Do'Urden's body apparently dead by his campsite. They give him the guillotine leaf, a rare potion that can separate someone's head from their shoulders while keeping both alive. And they take his head and hide it away, leaving his apparently decapitated body there, alone at the campsite, gunless. Hours pass. The doppelgangers arrive, just as the sun is beginning to set, and investigate his body. The plan goes off without a hitch, except for Baragon Emberclaw, the Leonin monk, overhears the name Naganine. Now, this is a name that has haunted him as a part of his backstory for a long time in the campaign now, and he's never been able to put a finger on who or where this Naganine is. But as soon as he hears it, he roars out, and it's initiative. The fight goes really well for the FBI at first. There are swaps, there are all sorts of crazy dramatic twists when the doppelgangers can not only change their appearance to impersonate someone else, but swap their location and change their appearance. So you could never be sure which was which, even if you tracked them perfectly. The FBI pull ahead pretty early in the fight because of a few things. One, their ability to discern the differences between the doppelgangers. And 2, their support systems. They had time to get ready before this fight. And between the 2 sort of supporting classes and the monk DPS, it looks like it's going to be a laydown loner. Until, disturbed by all of the noises, a drake comes down from the mountain heights. Now, for context, the party has been finding these monsters across the desert as they've traveled, and collecting them, bringing them together as mounts so that they may travel north faster. And there's one member of the party, Baragon, yet without a mount, who sees this dragon and wants it. Not just the status of it, but the flight. So, the dragon starts laying siege to the combat, attacking indiscriminately. Baragon takes a ton of hits. His doctors support him impeccably well. And the end result of the fight is, once all of the dust has settled, the last doppelganger, Naganine, slain, the drake, mounted by Baragon, and the party traveling north. A few quiet days pass after that. We go through a sort of sub-time lapse during travel, in which The party learns a few things. A note arrives mysteriously for Dr. Claymore Patch in the middle of the night, and something seems to irk him. He communes with his warlock patron, Dr. Bleakwood, who's looked over the party from afar this entire time, and receives mysterious instructions as to how to handle the gun. So, the party, all with their things in tow, all together, also interrogate the crystalline man that they've been storing in a briefcase for a long time so far, Oscar Spade, the way their adventure began together, who tells them, once they've cast the Speak with Dead spell as a ritual, who tells them they still have to find his daughter, Emery Spade, the initial quest that led nowhere, that was a complete dead end right off the bat. And furthermore tells them Azalea Hyde, the woman who traveled with the party for some time, died years ago, fell in battle as a former ally of Emery Spade. It doesn't make any sense. The party reaches out to Azalea, and she denies it outright. But suspicions grow between the party members. Tris Doherty, once he has his head reattached, has a heart-to-heart with Claymore Patch about the mistakes he's made that's led him to be in the situation he is. And he turns around and travels south to rejoin the Chain of Acheron, a group of paladins operating out of the southern side of the country, who have always thought that he was worthy, but never been able to recruit him. The session ended with the party arriving at Dunving, this large northern city where they are to create some great spectacle for Prince Parless, whose name is on the gun they carry now. And they're going to see if they can put on enough of a show to convince the people of Tyrigland that Nyxfair still is invested in its people and its future. And that's where they left off, looking at the palace. Now, DMing this session was crazy, because this was actually a part 2 of a session that we played earlier. This was the second half. I anticipated most of the things that happened here to happen the last time. And my notes, my sort of preparation for the session ended with the party getting all of their mounts. I had a spreadsheet for what kind of mounts they could get, and with the note that they were supposed to receive. I didn't know that the doppelgangers were going to have a Naganine there to get their attention, but I wanted some excuse to invest Baragon in the main arc of the story. It seemed like his backstory is sort of detached from everything else that's going on, whereas no one else is there. So as a way of roping him in, I dropped the name. Now, I'm scared that Naganine, this big entity he'd made out in his mind, had too fast of an appearance and anticlimactic of a death. So, I have ways to accommodate for that. And there will be, if not a return of Naganine, a second wave of catastrophes that fall out based on what's happened. There was a lot of improv in the battle. I had no idea when I was going to drop the dragon in. Things reached a bit of a stalemate during the fight. It got a little boring for just a minute, trying to figure out who was where and who had swapped with what, and which doppelganger looks like Cal and which looks like Baragon. So I'm like, fuck it. A dragon shows up. Like, why not? Let's make it epic. I have it in my notes here. I've got the stat block. Let's throw it in. It'll make for a saucy battle. I feel like most of the players got pretty good chances to roleplay too. I cracked out discussion tables for the first time. That's something that I'd seen in a bunch of games beforehand. Excuses to just get your players talking in character about something other than what's immediately pertinent to their character's situation. When they go to sleep at night, you just strike up a conversation about something that happened in their childhood, or so on and so forth, based on a D100, which is, of course, just me rolling dice and then asking a question. I think it's funny, but we DMs are allowed sort of soft cheats and sort of hard cheats. I didn't take any rolls this session. It was all pretty thorough. The combat balance was a little easier of a fight than I expected it to be, because the party's insight rolls were generally really high. But that's just something you're going to get with two people with really high wisdom among them. So maybe it's all right that it wasn't super challenging. Mounted combat also brings a lot of logistics that I don't think I set enough groundwork for going into the Derby, the Dunving Derby, where they're going to face the undead people who haunt the rally. Come on. So that's all stuff to work on. But my larger scale objectives this session was feeling out how much I want this campaign to be about big individual moments, and how much I want it to be about travel and experience and genuinely knowing the world. And I think it's pretty safe for me to conclude that party seems okay with travel, but it's hard for them to stay super invested, right? I felt the need to throw in a random Naganine name drop because these doppelgangers looked like an encounter that might have come up on a table, and they might not have been super invested otherwise. So, getting the players invested in each other's backstories is going to be a pretty tall order, but I look forward to doing it, and I think enough groundwork now has been laid. Today's cutscene came at the very end of the session. That's another thing that I've been working on a little bit too. I've been trying to put in these moments from the world that I think are noteworthy or are huge in my mind or pertinent to the party that, even though they couldn't possibly know, they get to see, like the opening to an episode. And this one came at the end of the session when Cal Reverie's father teacher, comes home after a hard day of work to find his wife and pours out how embarrassed and frustrated he is in front of her mother teacher and dances with her, and in a moment is restored, only for kids to crawl up to his front door window and see that he is delusional. He's losing his mind. He's dancing alone. So, a melancholy note to end it out. But I remain optimistic for the party's fortunes and for the campaign moving on. So that's pretty much the recap. Lots of improv. I'm making myself sweat. So that's Foreboding International. Charlie, who do you run for?
Yeah, I'm let me so just a little bit of background here. Bobo, I'm gonna change up the music. If you don't mind.
Oh, it's all right. No, the ambiance was getting to me too.